Good morning. I'm so glad to see all of you here. I'm Nadina Gardner, Director of the Division of Preservation and Access at NEH, and it is my great pleasure to introduce William Adams, Chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Dr. Adams came to NEH from Colby College, where he was president for 14 years. Earlier in his career, he coordinated the Great Works in Western Culture program at Stanford University, served as vice president and secretary at Wesleyan University, and was president of Bucknell University. When he arrived at NEH, he launched a major initiative, the Common Good, which seeks to bring the humanities into the public square. Please join me in welcoming Chairman Adams.
Thank you, Nadina, and good morning, everyone. What a great crowd. Thank you so much for coming. Nadina tells me that when the full registration is here today, it will be the biggest convening that NEH has ever, I think, organized. So we're very proud to have you and pleased that you are here with us to do this important work. A couple of weeks ago, I had the great pleasure to travel to Delaware, where I went to the University of Delaware, and as many of you know, and there may be some Delaware people here today, University of Delaware has one of the great conservation programs in the country, and we've been working with them for quite some time, and their extraordinary leader, Deborah Hess Norris. I had the great good fortune on that day to go to winter tour with Deborah and actually see the preservation laboratories as they're laid out there and watch graduate students doing the extraordinary things that they're doing in the preservation world. It reminded me, or it made me more mindful in a very detailed way of the importance of the preservation work that NEH has done over these 50 years now that we've been making grants to that and other fields in the humanities. Some $750 million in preservation grants over that period of time. And it's become a critical part of our work and is really one of the anchoring dimensions of the programs that we run here at NEH. So we're very proud of that part of our work, and we're very glad that you're here to share in this particular very important sector of preservation activity. You know, we all know that the history of the 20th century, and indeed of the 21st century too, is being recorded for the most part in audio and visual recorded sound and moving images. And in this field particularly, we know, you know as well, and your presence here today demonstrates this, that collaboration is critical, essential, since no one person could know everything about audiovisual materials, which range from wax cylinders to video. The issues that NEH applicants address when they come to us and that NEH panelists must discuss when they review these grant application always involves both the humanities content of the project and the technology that's involved in audiovisual projects. This is the collaborative approach I'm speaking to that AV preservation requires and deserves, for the challenges, of course, to consider and determine both what to keep and how it is that we can keep it. Many of you today here have received NEH awards, and it is your particular needs that we're interested in knowing more about, because they have shaped, of course, the projects that we have funded, and they represent the field's greatest challenges and opportunities. The range of NEH support over time for these projects and our resources is broad, extending from awards to help small institutions get preservation assessments of collections and storage, to large-scale projects in research and development for groundbreaking new methods to preserve audiovisual materials. And we get a great number of requests every year for support of cataloging and digitization of recorded sound and moving image collection. Of course, digitization is wonderful as it is, and you know this better than I do, will be presenting its own preservation challenges as we go through time. Audiovisual collections, as I said, provide the raw materials for the radio and film documentary projects supported by NEH through its Division of Public Programs. In the last decade, it has made awards of approximately $65 million for all media, including film, radio, and digital. And since 2005, the Division of Preservation and Access has awarded nearly $20 million for over 100 projects to catalog and preserve audiovisual collections. The public, of course, is increasingly drawn to audiovisual materials, which have become in recent years more authoritative to them, perhaps, than texts. And of course, that presents us with the interesting irony that in time, the sources of public information that the public values the most are endangered, while cuneiform clay tablets are doing just fine, as are many books compared with magnetic media. This, then, is a very important moment to seize, and your presence here shows your determination to work with us and to work together to identify the best approaches to take as we approach and attack this very significant challenge. The work you're doing already, of course, in important areas such as assessment, research, and development, as well as the scholarly and educational uses many of you have made of these resources, sets the stage for the work that lies ahead. Since 2009, NEH has made recorded sound and moving image materials preservation a priority for funding through its Division of Preservation and Access, and we will continue to make audiovisual a priority as long as it takes to tip the scales toward the survival of these extraordinarily important resources. I want to close by thanking the people who have been involved in bringing us together in this way today. That planning involved a planning program committee, and I want to thank out loud and individually its members that include Bertram Lyons, Judy Sue, Jeffrey Lambert, Pamela Wintle, Kate Murray, Emily Swafford, and Jenny Doctor. Here at NEH, we had extraordinary effort from the P&A team, including Josh Sternfeld, Jesse Johnston, Joel Whirl, and Adriana Cutler, and of course, our leader of Preservation and Access, Nadina Gardner. Please give a round of applause to these hardworking individuals. To kick us off this morning, it's a great pleasure to introduce Dave Isay, the founder and leader of the extraordinary StoryCorps. We're honored that he is here today and that he will be serving as the opening keynote speaker for our Playback Symposium. A radio producer for many, many years, Dave has received several broadcasting honors, including 6 Peabody Awards, as well as the all-important MacArthur Genius Grant Fellowship, predating his establishment, actually, at StoryCorps. He is the author and editor of the New York Times bestsellers Listening is an Act of Love, 2007, Mom, A Celebration of Mothers from StoryCorps in 2012, and Ties That Bind, Stories of Love and Gratitude from the First 10 Years of StoryCorps, published in 2013. His latest book is Callings, The Purpose and Passion of Work, published earlier this year. In 2015, Dave was honored with the TED Technology, Entertainment, and Design Prize, awarded annually to one individual with a creative, bold vision to spark global change. NEH is proud to be supporting the StoryCorps Public Archive Project through a 2016 grant from our Division of Preservation and Access, which will greatly enrich access to 67,000 digital interviews and other sources gathered by this unique enterprise under Dave's leadership. We're delighted he's here. Please join me in welcoming Dave Isay.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. Good to see you all. So happy to kick off Playback today. Thank you, Chairman Adams, for that introduction. As Bro said, I founded StoryCorps about 12 years ago. And before we start, do people here, has anybody here participated in StoryCorps? A few people. And have people heard it on the radio or know what it is? Okay, and who doesn't know what it is? Oh, good. Hi, how you doing? Come on up. Tell me about yourself. No, thank you for your courage to say that. So StoryCorps is, as Chairman Adams said, I made radio documentaries for many years for public radio, and did a lot of stuff, did a lot of social justice work, did stuff in prisons and homeless shelters and housing developments. And when I did, interviews like, say, on death row, and talked to these guys many years ago, oftentimes the kind of things we talked about, what their childhoods were like, their dreams, that they'd never talked about this before. And it was an important and sometimes a transformative moment I saw in people's lives to be able to talk about who they were. So had this kind of crazy idea 12 years ago. Also, I have to say, after spending a lot of time at the Library of Congress at the American Folklife Center, listening to the old acetate discs from the Federal Writers Project, and, as a kid, a radio producer, being transported, listening to these beautiful recordings that were done on the porches of shotgun shacks or in pool halls in Washington, D.C. in the 30s and 40s, beautifully recorded. And it's just everyday people's voices. There aren't that many of them. I think there are 900 or 1,000 of these discs. Most of the Federal Writers Project work, as you all know, was written. But you'd listen to these beautiful recordings of these voices, and they just transported me back in time, and I kind of became obsessed with them. So that experience, along with doing the radio documentaries, led me to create StoryCorps, which is takes documentary and kind of turns it on its head, because traditionally, as you all know, oh, there's Andy Lancet. Hi, one of the great archivists of our time. As you know, documentary is usually about doing, interviews, putting a piece together that is broadcast in film, radio, print, that a lot of people experience. And that's the purpose of a documentary, that you educate, enlighten, touch people with that work. But the idea with StoryCorps was to kind of turn that on its head and say the final product, actually is ancillary, doesn't matter that much. We wanted to give as many people as possible the chance to be listened to. So we created this booth 12 years ago in Grand Central Terminal, where you bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story, a parent, a grandparent, a friend. You come to this booth, you're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps. You go inside, and for 40 minutes you sit across from, say, your grandmother, and you listen, and you ask questions. And I knew, and you all know, that the microphone gives you the license to talk about things, to say things you don't normally get to say, to ask things you don't normally get to ask. So many people, and there's a facilitator in the corner for every one of these interviews who works with StoryCorps, who's running the equipment, and there to, they call it bear witness to the interviews. So from the very first interviews at StoryCorps, it was a very intense experience. People think of it as, if I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to this person who means so much to me? You have this conversation. At the end, you get a copy. When we started, people would get a CD. Now they get a digital copy. Another copy goes to the Library of Congress, so obviously your great-great-great-grandkids can get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. So a very simple idea. And actually, at first, when we opened, it was not that many people came. It was just kind of crazy. I had fears of kind of Jerry Springer, people shooting each other in the booth, none of which ever happened, but people didn't come. We had one person who came 210 times or something. Virginia Millington, our archivist, is there. She'll know the exact number. Everyone she ever met, she brought to the booth. She'd pull people off subways and interview them, which was fine because we had plenty of open spaces. And later on, as we got to be known, as our broadcast went on NPR, now we'll have waiting lists of 2,000 people 2 seconds after we open reservations. But at first it was easy to get into the booth. And I'm gonna play a bunch of stories. I also want to I'm also going to answer any questions that you have about StoryCorps. And I'm going to start at the very beginning of StoryCorps and then jump right to the present. But this is kind of a foundational StoryCorps story, and this takes place the first week of StoryCorps when nobody came to the booth. But Danny and Annie Peraza did find the booth, and they came to the booth to talk about their love story. Danny was an OTB, an off-track betting clerk in New York. Annie was a nurse. They're from Brooklyn. You'll hear thick Brooklyn accents. Any Brooklyn people here? Okay, so everybody else is going to have to listen very carefully. And they came to tell the story of their first date that had happened 25 years before. So this is Danny and Annie Peraza, week 1 of StoryCorps.
She started to talk, and I said, listen, I'm going to deliver a speech. I said, at the end, you're going to want to go home. I said, you represent a 34-letter word. I said, that word is love. I said, if we're going anywhere, we're going down the aisle because I'm too tired, too sick, and too sore to do any other damn thing. And she turned around and she said, well, of course I'll marry you. And the next morning, I called her as early as I possibly could.
And he always gets up early.
to make sure she hadn't changed her mind, and she hadn't. And every year on April 22nd, around 3 o'clock, I call her and ask her if it was today, would she do it again? And so far, the answer's been the same.
Yeah, 25 times yes.
You see, the thing of it is, I always feel guilty when I say I love you to you, and I say it so often. I say it to remind you that as dumpy as I am, it's coming from me. It's like hearing a beautiful song from a busted old radio. And it's nice of you to keep the radio around the house.
If I don't have a note on the kitchen table, I think there's something wrong. You write a love letter to me
Well,
every
the only
morning.
thing that could possibly be wrong is I couldn't find a silly pen.
To my princess, the weather out today is extremely rainy. I'll call you at 11:20 in the morning.
It's a romantic weather
And
report.
I love you, I love you, I love you.
When a guy is happily married, no matter what happens at work, no matter what happens in the rest of the day, there's a shelter when you get home. There's a knowledge, knowing that you can hug somebody without them throwing you downstairs and saying, get your hands off me. And being married is like having a color television set. You never want to go back to black and white.
So Danny and Annie came back to StoryCorps over and over again. They had the space to do it. We fell in love with them. They fell in love with us. Danny brought every character he ever met to the booth. Undercover narcotics detectives, major league umpires. It got to the point where Danny would call us on a Friday and say, I'm having a cataract operation on Tuesday. Do you need me to come in and document it on Thursday? And we'd say, sure, what the fuck, Danny, come on in. And of course, he came back with Annie over and over again to record their love story, talk about their love story. A few years after this was recorded, Danny got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, end-stage pancreatic cancer. He was very sick. And that week, we had a ceremony at our original booth in Grand Central Terminal, and we renamed it the Danny and Annie Peraza StoryCorps booth. And the next week, Danny called us and said, I'm too sick to get to the booth, but I need to record a final interview with Annie. Will you come to my house and do it? And of course, we said yes. So we went to see Danny and Annie at their home in Bay Ridge, and this is part of the conversation that they had.
The illness is not hard on me. It's just, the finality of it. And him, he goes along like a trooper.
Listen, even downhill, a car doesn't roll unless it's pushed, and you're giving me a great push. The deal of it is, we try to give each other hope, and not hope that I'll live, hope that she'll do well after I pass, hope that people will support her, hope that if she meets somebody and likes him, she marries him.
He has everything planned,
I'm working on it. She said it was her call. She wants to walk out behind the casket alone. I guess that's the way to do it, because when we were married, you know how your brother takes you down, your father takes you down? She said, well, I don't know which of my brothers to walk in with. I don't want to offend anybody. I said, I got a solution. I said, you walk in with me, you walk out with me. And the other day, I said, who's going to walk down the aisle with you behind the casket? To support her. And she said, nobody. I walked in with you alone. I'm walking out with you alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a thing in life where you have to come to terms with dying. Well, I haven't come to terms with dying yet. I want to come to terms with being sure that you understand that my love for you up to this point was as much as it could be, and it'll be as much as it could be for eternity. I always said the only thing I have to give you is a poor gift, and it's myself. And I always gave it. And if there's a way to come back and give it, I'll do that too. Do you have the Valentine's Day letter there?
Yeah. My dearest wife, this is a very special day. It is a day on which we share our love, which still grows after all these years. Now that love is being used by us to sustain us through these hard times. All my love, all my days, and more. Happy Valentine's Day.
I could write on and on about her. She lights up the room in the morning when she tells me to put both hands on her shoulders so she can support me. She lights up my life when she says to me at night, wouldn't you like a little ice cream? Or would you please drink more water? I mean, those aren't very romantic things to say, but they stir my heart. In my mind, in my heart, there has never been, there is not now, and never will be another Annie.
So we recorded that story on a Thursday and broadcast it on NPR the next Friday. And Danny died about 2 hours after the broadcast. Annie received thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of condolence letters from public radio listeners like this one. And she took a copy of them and she buried them with Danny. Because, you see Danny, you saw the picture of him. He was a guy who got made fun of a lot, who felt, that maybe his life, his story didn't matter, and she wanted to let him know that it did. He was, I think that he and Annie both stand for so many of the core values and ideas of StoryCorps, the wisdom and the poetry and the grace and the beauty that we can find in the voices and stories of people all around us, hiding in plain sight all around us when we take the time to listen. She kept a copy for herself, and now, years and years later, still, she reads one of those letters every day instead of the letter that she would have gotten from Danny. So that's the kind of a foundational story of StoryCorps. Since we launched, we've actually now about a little more than a quarter of a million Americans have participated in StoryCorps. We have booths across the country, mobile booths in different cities. We have an app, which I'll talk about a little later. And I think there's two sides to what StoryCorps does. We call it access to the experience, which is recording these 40-minute interviews. And I think and hope that the power of that is that, it's about listening. StoryCorps is really a project about listening, that's sitting with a loved one and saying, who are you, and what have you learned in life, and how do you want to be remembered, reminds people that they matter and that they won't be forgotten. And then the broadcast piece, which we're better known for now than the actual core service we deliver, I hope, almost by definition, when you hear one of these stories, it's going to be someone who's different than you. And this is core to so much of the work that you all do in archiving, that when you experience an authentic story, and walk in the footsteps of someone who you thought might be different than you, you recognize yourself in that person. It's about empathy, and all those good things that come out of that are shared humanity, and the fact that we share so much in common. And if we listened more and shouted less, how much of a stronger country we'd be. Which brings me to the present time. So I'm gonna play some stories from a series that we're releasing right now, which is called Who We Are. So this came about a few months ago. Steven Spielberg asked me to come out and talk to him, given the climate in the country, about figuring out how we can blanket the country with StoryCorps stories over social media as a kind of empathy machine. To get people, to kind of shake people out of the days of what's happening in the media and the environment in the country now. And we have started releasing recently stories from that series. Yeah, I'll play this one. So this is Julio Diaz, and he is a social worker from the Bronx who came to our original Grand Central booth with a friend to record an interview. He told a story about what happened one night when he was coming home from work on his way to eat at his favorite diner. And this is, we work with Upworthy, and what they've done is figured out a way to, make highly viral stories that travel well around Facebook, which is where all the action is now.
So I get off the train, I'm walking towards the stairs, and this young teenager pulls out a knife. He wants my money. So I just gave him my wallet, told him, here you go. He starts to leave, and as he's walking away, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, you forgot something. If you're going to be robbing people for the rest of the night, you might as well take my coat to keep you warm. So, he's looking at me like, what's going on here, And he asked me, well, why are you doing this? And I'm like, well, I don't know, man. If you're willing to risk your freedom for a few dollars, then I guess you must really need the money. I mean, all I wanted to do was go get dinner, and if you really want to join me, hey, you're more than welcome. So I'm like, look, you can follow me if you want. I just felt maybe he really needs help. So, we go into the diner where I normally eat. We sit down in the booth, and the manager comes by, the dishwashers come by, the waiters come by to say hi, So the kid was like, man, but you know everybody here. Do you own this place? I'm like, no, I just eat here a lot. He's like, but you're even nice to the dishwasher. I'm like, well, haven't you been taught you should be nice to everybody? So he's like, yeah, but I didn't think people actually behave that way. So I just asked him in the end, I'm like, what is it that you want out of life? He just had almost a sad face. Either he couldn't answer me or he didn't want to. The bill came, and I look at him and I'm like, look, I guess you're going to have to pay for this bill because you have my money and I can't pay for this. So if you give me my wallet back, I'll gladly treat you. He didn't even think about it. He's like, yeah, okay, here you go. So I got my wallet back. And I gave him $20 for it. I figure maybe it'll help him. I don't know. And when I gave him the $20, I asked him to give me something in return, which was his knife. And he gave it to me. It's funny because when I told my mom about what happened, no mom wants to hear this, but with her, she was like, well, you're the type of kid that always someone asked you for the time, you gave them your watch. I don't know, I figure, you treat people right, you can only hope that they treat you right. It's as simple as it gets in this complicated world.
Okay, one other quick one. Stop. So this is one we just released this week, which is really gentle, but I love it. It's a very recent StoryCorps interview between a fourth grader named Aiden Sykes and his dad, Albert, in Jackson, Mississippi.
Do you remember what was going through your head when you first saw me?
I remember when the doctor pulled you out, the first thing I thought was that he was being too rough with you. And he actually held you like a little Sprite bottle, and he was like, here's your baby. That was the most proud moment of my life. Don't tell your brothers, because it's 3 of y'all. But it was like looking at a blank canvas and just imagining what you want the painting to look like at the end, but also knowing you can't control the paint strokes. The fear was just, I got to bring up a black boy in Mississippi, which is a tough place to bring up kids, period. But there are statistics that say black boys born after the year 2002 have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And all 3 of my sons were born after the year 2002.
So, Dad, why do you take me to protest so much?
I think I take you for a bunch of reasons. One is that I want you to see what it looks like when people come together, but also that you understand that it's not just about people that are familiar to you, but it's about everybody. Did you know the work that Martin Luther King was doing was for everybody and it wasn't just for black people?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. So that's how you got to think. If you decide that you want to be a cab driver, then you got to be the most impactful cab driver that you can possibly be.
Are you proud of me?
Of course. You my man. I just love everything about you, period.
The thing I love about you never give up on me. That's one of the things I will always remember about my dad.
You said it like I'm on the way out of here or like I'm already gone.
So, Dad, what are your dreams for me?
My dream is for you to live out your dreams. It's an old proverb that talks about when children are born, children come out with their fists closed because that's where they keep all their gifts. And as you grow, your hands learn to unfold because you're learning to release your gifts to the world. And so for the rest of your life, I want to see you live with your hands unfolded.
One more that nobody's ever seen before. It just got finished, and will be released soon. So this speaks to the importance of the work that you do, the work that we do. This is Yusur Abu Salah, and she was one of, if you remember last year in North Carolina, there was a case where 3 Muslim kids were murdered, and Yusur was one of them. She was murdered along with her husband and her sister. They were living in an apartment and were killed by a neighbor. But a few months before she was murdered, she came to StoryCorps with her 3rd grade principal, who had also been the principal of her sister and of her husband. And they had a conversation. So I'm going to play this animation. It's her principal, Musrat Jabin, came back the day after, 2 days after she was murdered, to record a tribute to her. So you're going to hear a combination of the original interview with Yusur and the principal reflecting on her life.
Growing up in America has been such a blessing, and although in some ways I do stand out, such as, the hijab, the head covering, there's still so many ways that I feel so embedded in the fabric that is our culture, and here we're all one.
I remember Yusur as a little girl when she was in 3rd grade. She had this sense of giving that really makes her different from other children.
I still remember in 3rd grade when we asked for something, you used to say, don't put your hand like this. You would have your hand facing downwards as if you're taking something from someone.
Oh my God, you still remember?
And then you'd flip your hand over and you'd open your hand upward as, a giving gesture. Be giving, open, compassionate.
Dia, Yusur, and Razan, these kids, their face was so radiant. They would just bring light to the room. And they treat me like their mother.
I see you nowadays, and you're always asking, how are you? Where are you now in life? And now I'm at NC State University.
And got married to one of my other students.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting.
I was so happy, when I saw you guys together. And you will be together for the rest of your life, inshallah. I just remember Dia when he was growing up. He was getting taller, and because I'm a short person, he would stand behind me and put his hand over my head. And I just told him, Dia, you can never outgrow my heart.
Before our time is up, Sister Jabin, I'd just like to thank you. It's been an honor.
No, I want to thank you, Yusur, and the honor is mine. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I would like people to know and remember her as a practicing Muslim, as a daughter, and above all, as a good human being. When we write our comments on report cards, we say they exceeded our expectations. She exceeded our expectations.
We got an email yesterday from Yusur and Razan's dad and Dia's father-in-law. It said, thank you for your noble approach to telling a story of how love fights hate and bigotry. My wife, Amira, and I watched the video with bleeding yet proud hearts and tearful eyes. Though sad to watch, we can literally spend the rest of our lives watching Yusur, Razan, and Dia. We will continue their legacy, and we will survive with pain, with faith, dignity, and lots of pain. So, I think humanities in general, the work that you do, the work we do at StoryCorps, and especially now at this moment, I think of I like to think of StoryCorps every week as shaking people on the shoulder just by telling the human story and an authentic story. You know, it's the opposite of reality TV. No one comes to StoryCorps to get rich. No one comes to get famous. It's an act of generosity and love. And every day we shake, every week and every day when people participate or listen to our stories on the web, we're shaking people on the stories on the shoulder and saying, you know, this is what's important. This is what matters in life. And I think now we kind of need to be, you know, punching people in the face and reminding them that. But we're, you know, that's the fight we're fighting. I have like so many stories to play for you guys, and I don't want to throw your day off, but I do want to take a bunch of questions. So, questions from anybody? Who's got a question? It is impossible that this is the one group that has no questions. Yes. The person, you're the person who didn't know about StoryCorps? You like it? Okay, good. We won.
The question is, with this massive volume of interviews and testimonials that you're collecting, you mentioned earlier that one of the concerns was picking up things that will be highlighted on social media and go. Shall I start from the beginning?
No, I heard it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a certain curation process
Right.
to select things that might go viral. Are there any concerns about stories that are getting left out by looking for something that will pick up a lot of traction?
Yeah, well, you know, I should say that we look at every StoryCorps interview we've done. As Chairman Adams said, we've done 70,000 interviews in booths, and we've done another 100,000 with our app, which got released last year. And we look at every interview as equally valuable and potentially a sacred moment in people's lives. The way that I think it's 0.04% of what we record that actually gets on the air. So it's a very, very small amount. And the actual structure of the way that happens is that the facilitators who are present for every interview, who are you know, there to be present with the participants, to keep a ton of metadata. They do a log of what's happening in the interview. And there's a box that actually doesn't go to the Library of Congress. It's just internal that nobody will ever see, where they rate stories for the possibility of being broadcast. So that's how we call them. They give it a 1 to 5 star rating. And there are some stories that just kind of demand to be heard by a larger audience. We don't see any story as better or worse than any other story. And so that's how it happens. You know, I think of the interview that, again, the core idea of StoryCorps is giving the people the chance to have these conversations. So I interviewed my dad a bunch of years ago, and then he died very suddenly. You know, on the night that he died, I listened to his interview at 3 in the morning that night. And I'm an old dad. I have young kids, and I knew that this was the only way that my kids were going to get to know my dad. And it is my dad, completely my dad. You know, as so many of you know, it's like the soul is kind of contained in the human voice. Like, this is the best record of who he was. But you would have no interest listening to that 40-minute interview with my dad. To me, it's more interesting than any other interview in the StoryCorps collection. But again, it's just there are certain stories that have this kind of poetry. And demand to be shared with a larger audience. And I think that you know, the theory of this in my mind that I haven't developed is like concentric circles. Like, I think there are stories that might be interesting, like my dad's story might be interesting to people who lived in his building, and less so to people who lived on his street and so forth. And you can look at that in a small town. So what I hope happens over time, I mean, we're still a relatively small nonprofit, and we're resource constrained, but I hope that over time people edit their own stories and can figure out ways, or edit their community stories, because it's not that hard to do, and figure out ways to get them out there. I should say that, you know, our philosophy is, you know, we are a service organization. It's all about the people we serve who come to the StoryCorps booth. So when you come to StoryCorps, you can sign a release or not sign a release at the end of an interview. And when you do these interviews, obviously very intense things happen in these interviews. And I thought when we started StoryCorps that we'd see a compliance rate in the 70 to 80% range of people signing the release. If you don't sign the release, we give you the copy of your interview. You put it in a safe place. You put it in a bank vault, wherever you want. You've had this, hopefully, and I think it's safe to say that everybody's had a wonderful experience at StoryCorps because of the incredible skill of the facilitators. What we've seen is 99.99% compliance with signing the release, which really speaks to people's, you know, wanting to be part of history. And we also are, you know, a metrics-based organization. We do a lot of, even though we're obviously a heart organization, we do a lot of surveying. And the number one reason, and this is not something I expected, it's not by a lot, but the number one reason why people participate in StoryCorps is so that their interview can go to the Library of Congress. So that desire to feel part of history, feel part of American history is so strong. And I should say, just to give a little bit of more kind of depth on StoryCorps, I mean, we are a social justice organization. Half the slots are held open for people who've heard of us on public radio, and the other half of the slots, we work with about 500 nonprofits across the country each year, different nonprofits, juvenile justice groups, homeless service organizations, immigrants' rights groups. We tell those groups about StoryCorps, they tell the people they serve about StoryCorps, and those folks have a chance to come in with a loved one or a friend and leave this record and be part of American history. So that's how StoryCorps works. One more question, and then I'll, yes?
Dave, I want to, this is a comment more so than a question.
Okay.
My name is Bill Doggett, and I'm proud to be part of this and having recorded and I want to say in June of 2012 at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, and I made your 2012 National Story Day. So I'm very proud of that. But I also want to talk about the point that you mentioned about concentric and intersecting circles. I'm also involved with a portal, a viral digital portal called Question Bridge, which deals with it's an interactive video format that deals with African-American males of all ages and generations telling their stories. I'd like to encourage, if you're not already aware of questionbridge.com, that I think there's a value, and there's certainly clearly intersecting circles between what you do and what you've profiled here today. Thank
Great.
you.
I'll go check it out. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much
your
for
work.
profiling the stories that you shared this morning and
Thank you.
for also including me in 2012.
Thank you. And I also want to say, I mean, we feel humbly like we, you know, Virginia has done such a remarkable job over the last 6 years at StoryCorps. And, you know, as Chairman Adams said, I mean, so much of this is about partnership. And we've partnered with so many archivists and academics and had so many convenings to think about this archive, the collection. And we feel like humbly like we walk in the footsteps of you all here and the work that you're doing. A couple of other things about StoryCorps. As I said, we launched an app last year, which is really exciting. I also, like at the beginning of StoryCorps, was concerned about people using it with fidelity. I didn't know if it was going to be possible without a facilitator being in the booth for people to have these conversations. Basically, the app allows you to record a StoryCorps interview anytime, any place. It's a digital facilitator, gives you the questions. People prepare before they come to the booth, gives you the questions. You can order them. You record, and then at the end, you can upload it to the Library of Congress. And we decided to try and scale it last year at Thanksgiving. So we created something called the Great Thanksgiving Listen, where we asked U.S. history teachers across the country to assign their students to record an interview using the app over Thanksgiving with an elder. And we did a bunch of press, and Google, we had about a 6-week run-up to this thing. Google was nice enough to put us on their homepage, but we didn't know if it was going to work. And on the Thursday of Thanksgiving, we saw a little uptick in the interviews for the app, but nothing that dramatic. And on Friday, there was the same thing. Nothing was really happening. On Saturday, I started doing interviews with a couple of media outlets who had written about it and said, you know, this failed, but we really believe in this, and the country needs to connect and come together, and we're going to keep trying until it works. And on Sunday, we'd given up. I'd given up. And I got a text from a staff member on Sunday night saying, you better look at what's happening on the app. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews coming in, 50,000 interviews in one night, which is as many as we'd recorded in the first 10 years of StoryCorps combined. And in so many ways, I think because of the nature of what's happening in a StoryCorps interview, we're collecting the wisdom of humanity. And that was just another great piece of wisdom for me, because I actually hadn't realized that kids wait until Sunday night to do their homework. But it all came to me very quickly. So let's see. I only have time to play. I have so many stories I want to play you guys. But I think I'll just, let's see. Maybe I'll try and sneak two in. This is another story that speaks to what happens when you have an archive as large as StoryCorps. This is when it was the 25th anniversary of the Challenger shuttle. And this is, you're going to see a style of animation that's a different style that we use, not that written social style. When it was the 25th anniversary of the Shuttle Challenger, we wanted to, we went in our archive to see if anyone had come in to talk about the disaster. And the brother of one of the astronauts had come in to talk. And I should say, I'm going to beg your forgiveness. There is I know, who's a librarian here? Okay, we love librarians. Like, I cannot tell you, like, you're the fiercest, most amazing people ever, and we have all kinds of beautiful librarian stories. This is not a beautiful librarian story. Forgive me. First time I ever played this was at the ALA. But this is actually what the librarian looked like. Everything in StoryCorps is fact-checked, all the visuals are accurate, and the story is important, so I'm going to play it anyway. Oops, sorry.
When he was 9 years old, Ron, without my parents or myself knowing his whereabouts, he decided to take a mile walk from our home down to the library, which was, of course, public library, but not so public for black folks when you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because they were white folk only, and they were looking at him and said, you know, who's this Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this old librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She says, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm going to call the police. So he just propped himself up on the counter and sat there and said, I'll wait. So she called the police and subsequently called my mother. Police came down, two burly guys come in and say, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to the little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. He says, man, what's the problem? So my mother, in the meanwhile, she was called. She comes down there praying the whole way there. Lord Jesus, please don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, what's the problem? Well, he wanted to check out the books, and you know your son shouldn't be down here. And the police officer said, you know, why don't you just give the kid the books? And my mother said, he'll take good care of them. And reluctantly, the librarian gave Ron the books. And my mother said, what do you say? He said, thank you, ma'am. Later on, as youngsters, a show came on TV called Star Trek. Now, Star Trek showed the future where there were black folk and white folk working together. Right. And I looked at it as science fiction, because that wasn't going to happen, really. But Ronald saw it as science possibility. Mm-hmm. You know, he came up during a time when there was Neil Armstrong and all of those guys. So how was a colored boy from South Carolina wearing glasses, never flew a plane, how was he going to become an astronaut? But Ron was the one who didn't accept societal norms as being his norm. I mean, that was for other people. And he got to be aboard his own Starship Enterprise.
So we have a lot of work to do at StoryCorps, and we hope to work with you all as we go forward. I mean, the dream with StoryCorps is that someday will be woven into the fabric of American lives and the lives of all Americans, that the country will listen better to each other, that it will be a more compassionate country that recognizes the dignity and the value in everybody's story and everybody's life. There's a quote that I heard a while ago from a nun who's still alive in Philadelphia named Mary Lou Konecki. And actually, Mr. Rogers used to carry this quote in his wallet, which is how I heard about it. And she said, it's impossible not to love someone whose story you've heard. And I think it's true. And I also think that the work you do, that media put to its highest use, that getting out, preserving people's stories, preserving their pictures can be one of, if not the greatest force for good that the world has ever seen. And we have to keep fighting the good fight. I was thinking about this line that Daniel Berrigan said. I heard this, he died in the spring, about Dorothy Day. At her funeral, he said that she lived her life as though the truth were actually true. And I think that's the story of the people in this room. You're professionals who live as if the truth were actually true, that people's stories matter, that people's history matters, that their culture matters, that people matter, and that people matter infinitely and equally. So keep on, keep fighting the good fight always. Thank you for your doing to preserve our stories and history. And thanks for listening to the story of StoryCorps. Thank you very much.